Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. On the planet Klythera, the sky burned a deep crimson, an unhealed wound casting an endless sunset that stained the ash-strewn fields and shattered cities in the hues of dried blood. The wind howled through the cracked husks of leaning buildings, carrying with it the dry, mournful wail of a world long dead. Once humanity's proudest outpost among the stars, Klythera now stood as a frigid graveyard, where black smoke still smoldered from the ruins like the lingering souls of millions snuffed out. 3 years ago, the Formshapers, alien specters wielding ruthless technology beyond mankind's wildest nightmares, descended upon this place, leaving behind a silence of death and echoes of despair. Ethan Carver trudged through the rubble of Draconis Verge, each step heavy as if dragging the weight of a buried past. At 34, his face was weathered, etched with the harsh lines of sun-scorched days and gnawing hunger, his gray-brown eyes glinting with a cold, unrelenting vigilance. His tattered boots crunched over the parched dust, the brittle sound mingling with the distant clatter of rusted metal and the wind, the cries of abandoned machines, or perhaps the last groans of this forsaken planet. His hand gripped the strap of a threadbare canvas bag slung over his shoulder, its meager contents rattling faintly: 3 murky water bottles reeking of metallic tang, 2 moldy ration packs dusted with ash, and a dull dagger, its steel edge worn thin from countless sharpenings on stone. That was all he had, the scraps of survival in a world that had forgotten the light. Ethan was no hero, nor did he dream of salvation. He was a scavenger, a reluctant survivor forged by necessity, scouring the ashes for a drop of water, a crumb of food, anything to stretch his existence a few hours longer. Each day was a silent war, no gunfire, no visible foe, just the relentless gnawing of hunger and the cold seeping into his bones. Yet today, as the crimson glow of dusk began to fade, something stirred within him, an instinct, raw and unnameable. The wind carried the sharp scent of burnt metal, and from afar came a faint sound, not the wind, not a rockfall, that made him halt. His heart quickened, his senses screaming that something lurked in the thickening shadows. His eyes swept over the broken walls, the twisted steel beams jutting out like the spine of a long-dead beast. He didn't know what awaited him, but deep down, Ethan felt it. This was no ordinary day of survival. This was the dawn of something greater, a tale beyond his imagining, of compassion on the edge of life and death, of faith amidst despair, and of humanity's unbreakable will against the infinite dark of the cosmos. Ethan trudged down a narrow alley, flanked by the jagged remains of once towering buildings now reduced to crumbled concrete, their edges sharp and uneven like the teeth of a long-dead predator. His ragged boots scraped against the dry dust, each step a brittle crunch echoing through the stillness of Draconis Verge. The deep red light of sunset filtered through gaps high above, glinting faintly off rusted metal shards protruding from the wreckage, dying embers in a world gone cold. The wind sliced through, cold and biting, carrying the acrid stench of ash and scorched steel, intertwined with the dry rasp of Klythera's final breaths. He tightened his grip on the strap of his worn canvas bag, feeling the pitiful weight of his supplies: 3 murky water bottles, 2 moldy ration packs, and the blunt dagger, his fragile lifeline against oblivion. Suddenly, Ethan froze. A strange sensation clawed at his chest, not hunger, not exhaustion, but something deeper, a wordless premonition. In the shadowed corner behind a split wall, where darkness pooled like spilled ink, he glimpsed a figure. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the mind, hunger, and the dim light had fooled his eyes before in these endless, lonely days. But as he leaned closer, squinting through the gloom, a chill raced down his spine. It was a woman, or something like one. She was tall, her form graceful yet worn, like an ancient statue eroded by time. Silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, shimmering faintly in the dark like threads woven from moonlight. Her skin was a deep, alien blue, shimmering with faint, circuit-like veins beneath the surface. Her eyes, a piercing violet, glowed with a haunting pain, twin gems buried in the shadows. She sat hunched beside a large, twisted slab of rusted metal, her skeletal arms wrapped tightly around herself, fingers pale and clenched as if clinging to the last scraps of warmth in Klythera's biting cold. Ethan stood still, his breath heavy, curling into faint wisps of white in the frigid air. She was clearly spent, her eyes sunken into deep hollows, cheekbones jutting sharply beneath thin skin, ribs faintly visible through the tatters of her strange garment. Her silver hair, matted and tangled, clung to her blue face, strands trembling with each shallow breath. He could hear it, her gasps, ragged and wheezing, like wind through an empty cave. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away. Careful! This is Klythera, weakness is prey here! Stay clear, stay alive! But as his gaze met those violet eyes, something shifted. The warnings faded, drowned by a flood of something unfamiliar yet achingly human. He saw no threat, no malice, only a raw, silent despair he knew all too well, a mirror to his own soul cracked by years of solitude. He took a deep breath, steadying the pounding in his chest. Dust scratched his throat, and he coughed to dry, hollow sound breaking the silence. Slowly, he stepped forward, boots dragging faint trails through the ash. Each movement was deliberate, cautious, as if a single misstep might shatter this fragile moment, might make her vanish like a fleeting dream. A few meters away, he stopped, studying her closer. Her torn garment wasn't cloth, it was thin as silk yet glinted metallic, shredded at the shoulder and waist, revealing faint scars tracing her arms like echoes of a forgotten battle. The metal slab beside her bore strange carvings swirling, wave-like patterns glowing faintly then fading, not human script but something otherworldly. She didn't belong here, that much was clear as the crimson sky above. "Hey, you okay?" His voice came out softer than intended, nearly swallowed by the wind. She flinched, head snapping up, violet eyes wide with primal fear. For a heartbeat, they were statues, two figures locked in a silent standoff amid the ruins. Ethan saw her tremble, her thin shoulders quaking beneath the weight of terror. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped, not from inability, but from sheer exhaustion. Her arms tightened around herself, nails digging into her skin, leaving faint red marks on her blue flesh. "Don't be scared," he said, softer still, almost a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The wind surged, whipping dust into his eyes, but he held her gaze. Those violet eyes flicked to his hand, where he gripped a ration pack, one of his last two, a lifeline he meant to hoard for the long night ahead. But looking at her trembling hands, her sunken eyes burning with silent hunger, something warm stirred in him, a flicker of defiance against Klythera's cruelty. Without a second thought, he extended the pack, his calloused hand shaking not from fear, but from the weight of what this act could mean. Humanity hadn't died in him yet, not even here. Her skeletal hands reached out, slow and hesitant, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Her cold, delicate fingers brushed his, light as a breeze, then closed around the pack. Tears welled in her violet eyes, spilling silently down her blue cheeks, soaking into the dust in tiny, fleeting stains. She tore into the ration with trembling hands, each motion careful yet desperate, like she feared breaking this precious gift. She ate ravenously, small bites swallowed with a hunger born of days, maybe weeks, without sustenance, her eyes shut tight as if savoring every crumb. The dry crunch of her chewing filled the stillness, blending with her ragged breaths a mournful symphony in the wreckage. Ethan sank down a few steps away, leaning against a broken wall, watching in silence. He didn't want to disrupt her fragile peace, this fleeting reprieve he'd given her. Her tears weren't just from hunger, he knew that. They were the cry of a broken spirit, a loss so deep he couldn't yet fathom it. When she finished, her thin hands rose to cover her face, fingers shaking as they wiped at the tears still falling unchecked. A faint sob broke from her throat, soft and choked, a call from a place he couldn't reach. His chest tightened, an ache spreading through him, not pity, but something fiercer. He knew loneliness, knew survival by the thinnest thread, but he'd never seen anyone so utterly defeated yet still clinging to life. She wasn't human, not of Klythera, not of his world, but she was more like him than he'd ever expected. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice nearly lost to the wind. He knelt beside her, close but not too close, his hand resting lightly on the dust, a silent vow. "I'm here. You can trust me." Her violet eyes lifted to meet his, shimmering with tears, glowing with gratitude and pain. Her cracked lips trembled, But no words came. She was too drained, too overwhelmed by this sudden kindness. A long, shaky breath escaped her, faint but real, as if shedding an invisible burden. Ethan held her gaze, and in that moment he understood. Sometimes, a small act, a ration pack, a gentle word could ignite a spark in the endless dark of a broken world. Humanity's stubborn light still burned, even here. Night fell over Klythera, a thick, inky darkness seeping through the cracks of Draconis verge, swallowing the last crimson glow of sunset. The wind howled in fierce gusts, kicking up ash and the sharp tang of scorched metal, whispering through the ruins like the ghosts of the lost. Ethan stood in the alley, his gray-brown eyes scanning the shadows, hand gripping the strap of his frayed canvas bag. The strange woman, still nameless to him, stood a few steps away, her frail form shivering in the biting cold, yet her violet eyes held a faint, flickering light, a flame refusing to die in the storm. He couldn't leave her here, not in this state, not amid the frozen wreckage where death lurked around every corner. Humanity might be battered on Klythera, but it wasn't dead, not while he still breathed. He gestured for her to follow, a sharp nod cutting through the silence. "Come on," he said softly, his voice nearly lost to the wind, but his eyes carried the command. Turning, he led her away from the broken wall, stepping over twisted metal and shattered concrete toward his temporary refuge, a small room buried deep within a collapsed building over 3 miles away. The journey wasn't easy. His torn boots scraped the dry dust, a brittle crunch underfoot, while her fragile legs stumbled behind, each step slow and labored, as if every ounce of strength was wrung from her just to keep moving. Ethan glanced back countless times, his gaze tracing her blue face, checking if she could hold on. Her arms hugged her body tightly, nails digging into her skin, leaving faint red marks. She didn't complain, didn't make a sound, but her silence gnawed at him more than any cry. Klythera forgave no mistakes. Every faint noise, the clank of distant metal, the skitter of a loose stone, snapped Ethan's nerves taut, his hand instinctively clutching the dull dagger in his coat pocket. He knew this dead land too well. Rusted patrol drones of the Formshapers still roamed somewhere out there, radiation-twisted beasts stalked the dark, and other survivors, desperate, ruthless, would kill for a scrap of food. He couldn't afford carelessness, not now, not with her in tow. The night stretched endlessly, the faint moonlight piercing through gaps above, illuminating a path littered with broken steel beams and dangling cables like the veins of a corpse long bled dry. Ethan quickened his pace, pulling her along, his eyes darting through the shifting shadows. When they finally reached the refuge, Ethan exhaled a shallow relief, not a release. His shelter was a cramped room, hidden within the husk of a fallen building that once served as a command center before the collapse. The roof gaped open, exposing the black sky, dripping stale rainwater onto the floor in murky puddles. A makeshift bed, a frame of rusted metal and torn fabric, teetered in one corner, creaking at the slightest touch. In the center, a small fire flickered, fed by scavenged dry wood, its weak flames dancing, casting meager warmth against the bone-deep chill. Ethan gestured to the bed, pointing at the ragged cloth in a wordless offer. She staggered forward, her trembling legs buckling as she reached it, her thin frame collapsing like a dry leaf caught in the wind. Ethan knelt beside his bag, rummaging in the dark for what little food remained. His hand brushed a dented tin of dry beans, cold metal sticking to his fingers, 3 rock-hard strips of salted meat rattling beside it, and a tiny, shriveled fruit, brown and wrinkled like a mummified relic. It wasn't much, just enough for another day, maybe 2 if he starved himself. He held up the tin of beans, his calloused hand trembling slightly as he placed it in hers. Her skeletal fingers reached for it, still shaking, but this time her eyes held less panic. Those violet depths traced his face, flickering with curiosity and faint wonder, as if she couldn't fathom why he'd share his lifeline. They ate in silence, the dry crunch of meat blending with the fire's crackle, yet their shared presence seemed to ease the room's hollow cold. In the firelight, Ethan studied her closer. Her deep blue skin shimmered with faint, vein-like patterns, glowing subtly as the flames flared. Her violet eyes weren't just striking, they were sharp, profound, as if they'd once pierced the dark between stars, witnessed things beyond his grasp. Her silver hair, though filthy and tangled, gleamed like fiber optics, each strand catching light in ways human hair never could. Her torn garment, thin as silk, metallic and sheen, gaped at the shoulder and waist, revealing scars that weren't random but precise, etched by technology he couldn't name. She wasn't from Klythera, wasn't like anything from the tales of cosmic adventure kids once swapped around campfires before this world broke. Who was she? A fugitive? A lost traveler? Or something far more dangerous? When she finished the last bean, she looked up at him. Her violet eyes flashed with a complex emotion, gratitude laced with deep sorrow, and a fragile spark of hope, faint as the fire before them. Ethan's chest tightened, warmth spreading through him, thawing the cold that had settled in his bones. He'd lived alone too long, hardened to rely only on himself, accustomed to the mute solitude of Klythera's endless days. But here, facing her, he realized this connection wasn't just survival, it was something deeper, a thread pulling him from the darkness he'd grown too used to. "I'm Ethan," he said, voice rough from a parched throat, pointing to his chest, then to her, hoping she'd catch on. She stared for a moment, cracked lips trembling, then whispered a strange sound. "Zyrethel," her voice faint, halting, but carrying an eerie melody, like a breeze from a distant world he'd never known. He didn't understand it, but the sound burrowed into his mind, a mystery he vowed to hold. "If that's your name, that's what I'll call you," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, the first in months. She nodded, her gaze softening, her thin shoulders easing as if shedding a fraction of her burden. Then, abruptly, she pointed to a dark corner of the room, where Ethan kept a pile of scavenged junk, rusted metal scraps, a broken water canister, odds and ends he didn't even know the use for. He frowned, puzzled, but when she staggered to her feet, legs trembling under her weight, he hurried after her. Zyrethel knelt by the pile, her frail hands digging with sudden urgency until she pulled out a small, twisted piece of metal, its surface etched with glowing then fading alien symbols. Her violet eyes blazed, alive with fire, and she turned to him, loosing a rapid string of high, sharp sounds, a desperate plea. Ethan shook his head. "I don't understand." But she pressed on, pointing to the metal, then skyward, repeating, "Zyrethel," with frantic insistence, her hands shaking as they clutched the object. Ethan froze, heart pounding. That metal, was it tied to where she came from? A ship? A signal home? He opened his mouth to ask, but before the words could form, a loud crash echoed beyond the wall, metal slamming hard, a sound that cut through the room's stillness like a blade. Ethan yanked the dagger from his pocket, his other hand pulling Zyrethel behind him, body taut as a bowstring. His eyes locked on the rusted door, pulse hammering in his ears. The mystery of her, of that metal, of everything she carried, it'd have to wait. Danger was here, and on Klythera, danger never came alone. Humanity's grit would be tested again, and Ethan was ready. Ethan pressed himself against the rusted wall of the small room, his breath slowing to a near halt as he strained to listen. The sound from moments ago, sharp, heavy, like metal crashing into stone, still echoed in his mind, though silence now smothered the space. But this quiet wasn't safe. It was thick, suffocating, the stillness before a storm's fury. He glanced back at Zyrethel. She sat hunched on the makeshift bed, her skeletal arms clutching the small metal fragment, her violet eyes wide with unease. Ethan raised a hand, signaling silence, his finger brushing his lips. She nodded, whether she understood or simply mirrored his instinct, he couldn't tell. Yet her gaze, sharp, alert, told him she felt it too, danger creeping closer. He edged toward the door, a warped, rusted slab of metal he'd rigged to block the entrance. Its pitted surface chilled his hand, and as he peered through a narrow crack, his breath curled into faint wisps in Klythera's icy air. Outside, the darkness shifted, not the wind-stirring rubble, not the scrawny beasts he'd seen skulking nearby. This was deliberate, a slow, rhythmic motion, like the stalking steps of a predator shrouded in shadow. His heart thudded, blood roaring in his ears, but he forced his grip steady on the blunt dagger tucked in his coat pocket. "Stay here," he whispered to Zyrethel, his voice rough, nearly lost to the wind. He knew she didn't grasp his words, but her faint nod and the way she clutched the metal like a lifeline showed she trusted him. Ethan inhaled deeply, the damp earth and rust filling his lungs. He nudged the door just enough to slip out, dagger clenched so tight his knuckles whitened, the cold steel pressed against his calloused palm. Under the dim moonlight filtering through gaps in the ruined roofs, the alley stretched before him, shadows twisting across the ground like spectral claws. Then he saw it, a hulking shape, 50 meters away, standing motionless amid the wreckage like a monument to death. It was a drone, a rusted relic of the Formshapers' invasion 3 years prior, at least 10 feet tall, its twisted metal arms bent like gnarled branches snapped in a storm. A patrol unit, abandoned yet still alive, powered by some lingering energy in its corroded core. Its pillar-like legs sank into the dusty ground, emitting a dry screech with each shift. A single red light glowed on its frame, a cold, unblinking eye yet to sweep toward him. Ethan knew if it detected his heat, or Xyrathel's, there'd be no running. His dagger, sharp as he'd kept it, was a child's toy against this machine. He slipped back inside without a sound, grabbing Xyrathel's hand. "We're leaving now!" His voice was low but firm, yanking her to her feet. Her cold, fragile skin trembled under his grip, so thin he feared she'd shatter. She stumbled upright, her frail legs barely holding her, violet eyes locked on his with a mix of trust and panic. They burst from the room, footsteps pounding the cracked concrete, blending with the wind's howl through the leaning walls. Ethan led her through tight alleys, weaving past jagged steel beams and dangling cables, his gut twisting as the drone's metallic screech rose behind them, closer, colder. It had sensed them. The red light swept the dark, illuminating shattered walls, glinting off metal like the eyes of a dead god tracking their every move. They ran, not looking back, Ethan's breath bursting in white clouds, his throat raw from dust and cold. Xyrathel clung to his hand, her faltering steps a faint echo beside his heavy tread, her nails digging into his skin. The drone's screeches grew louder, punctuated by the crash of metal as it plowed through debris, each sound a hammer blow to Ethan's resolve. He scanned the alley for escape, but towering walls and rubble blocked every path ahead. They were cornered literally and figuratively. Then Xyrathel yanked his arm, her sudden strength startling him off balance. She pointed to a narrow tunnel, half hidden beneath a pile of wreckage, its mouth obscured by broken steel and thick ash. Ethan hesitated, too tight, too risky, but the drone's screech was right behind them, its cold exhaust brushing his neck. No choice. He nodded, dropping to his knees and motioning her in first. She crawled forward, hands clawing at the tunnel's edge, her thin frame vanishing into the dark. Ethan followed, squeezing through, his shoulders scraping sharp metal, blood seeping through his torn sleeves. Inside, the tunnel was a choking grave. The stench of damp earth and rust clogged his lungs like poison gas. They crawled through pitch-black stretches, Ethan's knees grinding against jagged stone, his hands groping blindly ahead. Xyrathel's ragged breathing guided him, faint but steady, a beacon in the despair. The drone's screeches faded, muffled by layers of earth and ruin above. He didn't know where this led, but it had bought them a sliver of time, a fragile chance to survive the night. When they emerged on the other side, Ethan gulped the frigid air, its bite cleansing the tunnel's stench from his lungs. He pulled Xyrathel up, steadying her as she swayed, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. They stood in a new ruin, a derelict warehouse half sunk in sand, its rusted walls teetering on the brink of collapse. Scattered crates littered the floor, some split open, spilling unidentifiable debris. Moonlight streamed through holes in the roof, casting weak beams onto the dust-caked ground. Xyrathel gasped, chest heaving beneath her torn garment, but her violet eyes flared as they landed on a large crate in the corner. She stumbled toward it, trembling hands clawing at the lid, nails scraping metal with faint screeches. Inside lay dry rations, shriveled fruit, rock-hard salted meat, and a strange gray powder Ethan didn't recognize. She pointed at it, then herself, letting out a high, joyful chirp like a bird in a wasteland. Ethan nodded. "All right, we'll take it." He moved to help, but as he turned to check the entrance, a deafening blast shook the warehouse. The rusted door tore apart, shards flying, and the drone's red light flared in the dark, unrelenting, merciless. It had found them. No more tunnels to flee through. Humanity's grit would face its test head-on. The drone's metallic screech followed the blast, sharp and menacing, a roar from a beast roused from slumber. Ethan reacted on instinct, heart slamming against his ribs as he shouted, "Get down!" He shoved Xyrothal behind a large crate, hand gripping her shoulder, feeling her frail frame quake beneath her tattered garb. They hit the floor just as a searing red laser sliced the air, missing them by inches. The beam struck the wall behind, scorching the rusted metal, leaving a blackened smear that smoked and stank of burnt steel. Dust billowed, stinging Ethan's eyes, but he kept them locked on the intruder. The drone lumbered in, its heavy metal legs crashing against the floor, each step a thunderous blow shaking the cramped space. Debris danced with every impact, and its high-pitched whine piercing, relentless echoed off the walls, a death knell amplified in the confined warehouse. Towering and rusted, it radiated lethal power, its broken arms twisting like claws warped by a storm. The red light atop its frame swept the dark, a single, emotionless eye hunting with ruthless precision, a legacy of the Formshaper's cold genius. Ethan clutched his dagger, sweat slicking his grip, the blunt blade pressed to his palm. He knew it was useless against this thing, a twig facing a wildfire, but surrender wasn't in him. Not now, not with Xyrothal beside him. Humanity didn't bow, even to machines of alien make. He scanned the warehouse, eyes darting for anything to fight back with. A broken steel rod, 3 feet long, lay amid the rubble, its jagged edge glinting under the moonlight. Ethan gritted his teeth and lunged, snatching it up in one swift motion. Its weight strained his shoulder, but adrenaline burned away the pain. He spun, yelling to draw the drone's focus, then hurled the rod like a spear. It spiraled through the air, striking the drone's mangled arm with a shrill clang. Sparks flew, but the machine barely paused, its red eye snapping to Ethan, a second laser blazing toward him, hot and swift as lightning. Ethan grabbed Xyrothal, yanking her toward a corner, her cold wrist trembling in his grip, her pulse racing beneath her thin skin. They darted through scattered crates, his foot catching on a metal shard, nearly toppling him, but he clenched his jaw and pushed on. The laser grazed past, heat singeing his hair, charring the floor beside his boot. The drone's screeches closed in, heavy and inevitable, a warning they couldn't outrun. Ethan shoved Xyrothal behind another crate, both panting, backs pressed to cold metal, his heart hammering like it had burst free. He met her gaze, violet eyes wide with terror, yet glinting with a strange resolve. She wasn't done fighting either. Then Xyrothal tugged his arm, her frail strength surprising him again. She pressed the small metal fragment, the one she'd clung to since the shelter, into his hand, her trembling fingers urgent. Her violet eyes blazed, pointing at the drone, miming a press with fierce intent. Ethan frowned. "What?" His voice rasped, drowned by the drone's whine. But she nodded sharply, her gaze unwavering, conveying a message words couldn't. No time to question. The drone's steps thundered just beyond the crate, its red light sweeping inches away. Ethan sucked in a breath, the stench of ash and oil flooding his lungs, then bolted from cover, clutching the fragment, body taut as a drawn bow. He waited as the drone turned, its broken arms swinging to aim elsewhere. Ethan charged, boots pounding the floor, dust swirling in his wake. Closer, the reek of burning oil hit him, heat radiating from its core. He dodged another laser, ducking low, then leaped, jamming the fragment into a small gap in the drone's rusted hull, a slit where cables dangled like severed veins. A blinding green flash erupted, a high-pitched screech splitting the air. The drone froze, legs quaking violently, then collapsed in a deafening crash, shards scattering, sparks raining down. Ethan hit the ground hard, back slamming into the floor, breath bursting in ragged gasps. He turned, chest heaving, lungs burning. Xyrothal emerged from behind the crate, legs unsteady but eyes alight, a faint smile breaking across her face, the first he'd seen. Ethan hauled himself up, still clutching the now cold fragment, staring at her with a mix of awe and suspicion. "How'd you know that?" His voice cracked, fading into the post-battle hush. She didn't answer, just tilted her head, that faint smile lingering, but her violet eyes shimmered with a deep wisdom he hadn't noticed before. That fragment wasn't junk, it was a tool, a weapon, maybe a key from her world, one he'd barely glimpsed. Ethan stood, legs shaking from exhaustion, but a fresh surge of adrenaline coursed through him as he looked at Xyrathal. She wasn't just a stray he'd saved, not some fragile survivor needing his shield. She had a past, a purpose, and he'd stumbled into something bigger than scavenging Klythera's ashes. He steadied himself with a deep breath, then motioned her to help gather the rations. They worked fast, his hands scooping dried fruit and salted meat, hers trembling but stuffing them into his worn bag. No words passed, but their silence now held weight, a trust forged in fire and steel. They stepped out under Klythera's black sky, moonlight casting faint glows on the dry sand ahead. Ethan checked their surroundings, eyes piercing the shifting shadows, wary of new threats. But as his boots sank into the sand, he froze. A strange mark gleamed under the light, not human footprints, but deep, jagged tracks of a multi-legged thing with razor claws, fresh and warm to the touch. Ethan knelt, fingers tracing the print, feeling the sand's lingering heat. He looked up at Xyrathal, and for the first time, she recoiled. Her violet eyes widened, raw fear flooding them, her frail body trembling like a leaf in a gale. Ethan stepped closer, grasping her hand, her icy skin quaking under his fingers. "You know what's hunting us, don't you?" His voice was low, firm, unyielding. She didn't speak, her cracked lips trembling wordlessly. But her silence, and the terror she couldn't hide, answered louder than words. A chill raced down Ethan's spine, not from Klythera's cold, but from the realization the drone was just the beginning. Something bigger, deadlier, stalked them in the dark, and Xyrathal knew exactly what it was. Humanity's defiance would be pushed to its limits. Days bled into each other on Klythera, an endless march of weary steps and long shadows dragging beneath a sunset red as dried blood. Ethan and Xyrathal trekked across vast ash fields, the cracked, barren earth splitting like the skin of a long-dead beast, past ghost cities standing silent in ruin, toppled buildings leaning like skeletal giants left from a final war. The wind shrieked through rubble gaps, carrying the bite of scorched metal and fine ash, stinging Ethan's eyes as he gripped his bag of scavenged rations, shriveled fruit, rock-hard meat, and that odd gray powder Xyrathal seemed to recognize. It was all that kept them alive, hour by hour, in this dead expanse. But survival wasn't Ethan's only burden now. A new threat loomed, silent yet relentless, hiding in the dark. Those strange tracks, deep, claw-gouged imprints appeared more often, etched in dry sand or damp ash, silent warnings from an unseen hunter. At night, when they paused to rest, Ethan caught low, guttural rumbles on the wind, not mechanical, but alive, distant yet close enough to raise the hairs on his neck. He scanned the shadows, dagger tight in hand, but saw nothing beyond swaying ruins and howling gusts. It didn't ease him, it fueled his doubts. Xyrathal, her blue skin shimmering, violet eyes deep as the void, grew into an enigma Ethan couldn't unravel. She wasn't the helpless survivor he'd first taken her for. Her recognition of the gray powder, her trick with the drone's fragment, and above all, her reaction to those tracks, recoiling, trembling, eyes wide with dread, proved she knew more than she let on. At first, he'd seen her as someone to shield, a lost soul needing his humanity to endure. Now, as they trudged through the wasteland, his glances held not just care but scrutiny. Who was she? Where did she come from? And most pressing, what was she fleeing? The questions gnawed at him, as persistent as the hunger that once clawed his gut in Klythera's early days. One night, under a pitch-black sky where faint stars peeked through thick clouds, they found an old bunker beneath a crumbled settlement. Its narrow entrance, choked with dust and withered vines, opened to a space wide enough for refuge, its cracked concrete walls and damp floor reeking of mold. Ethan kindled a small fire from dry wood he'd carried, its feeble flames flickering, offering scant warmth against the bone-chilling night. Xyrathal sat across from him, knees drawn up, the firelight dancing in her violet eyes like gems trapped in shadow. They ate in silence, the dry crack of salted meat mingling with the fire's pops, but the air between them was heavy, charged with an inevitable reckoning. Ethan set his meat down, wiping his hands on his torn coat, then fixed her with a hard stare. His gray-brown eyes held no softness now, only a cold resolve. "Zirathul," he said, his voice low and steady, echoing in the bunker's confines. "Who are you? Where'd you come from? And what's hunting us?" He leaned forward, tracing the claw-marked footprint into the soft dirt beside the fire, its jagged curves stark and menacing. He pointed at it, eyes never leaving hers, demanding an answer, something to pierce the fog of doubt clouding his mind. Zirathul met his gaze, her violet eyes shimmering in the firelight, flickering with hesitation and deep sorrow. She stayed silent, her thin hands gripping her knees, nails digging into her skin, leaving faint red marks. Then, slowly, she reached out, trembling fingers brushing the dirt. She drew a shape, a spacecraft, its lines intricate and flowing, unlike any human design Ethan recalled from childhood tales of cosmic explorers. She pointed to it, then upward through the bunker's ceiling, whispering a strange sound. "Kron!" Her voice faint but melodic, an echo from a world beyond his reach. Ethan frowned, piecing it together. "Your ship? You crashed here?" He leaned closer, voice urgent. She nodded, slow but firm, her violet eyes holding his. Then she drew again, a multi-legged creature, towering, its curved claws matching the tracks they'd found. She pointed at it, shaking her head fiercely, arms wrapping tight around herself, body quaking as if plunged into a nightmare. A choked sob escaped her, faint and raw, a cry stifled too long. Ethan's heart clenched. It clicked, she wasn't just fleeing Klythera's ruin. She was running from something of her own world, a relentless pursuer from Kron. She couldn't shake. He opened his mouth, needing more why she'd fallen here, what had driven her to this desolate edge of the stars. But the ground trembled before he could speak. A guttural roar thundered from afar, deep and earth-shaking, the fire flickering near extinction. Zirathul clutched her head, a piercing scream tearing from her, a high, heart-wrenching cry of a soul ripped apart. Ethan lunged, pulling her up, hands gripping her shoulders. "We've got to move!" His voice cut through the roar, sharp and commanding. He stomped out the fire, ash swirling, then dragged her from the bunker, heart pounding with a deathly premonition. They burst into the frigid night, Klythera's cold slapping his face like a fist. The sky was moonless, only vague shadows of ruins surrounding them. Then he saw it, a colossal creature, twice the drone's height, looming in the ash field not far off. 6 clawed legs, long and hooked like scythes, sank into the ground, each step a tremor. Its blood-red eyes blazed in the dark, not mechanical, but alive, brimming with savage hunger. This wasn't a form-shaper relic. It was from Zirathul's world, a hunter from Kron, and it had found her. Ethan froze for a heartbeat, breath caught in his throat, hand crushing Zirathul's as her faint pulse raced under his grip. The creature roared again, the sound rolling across the field, ash swirling in its wake, its red eyes locking onto them. Zirathul trembled, shrinking back, but there was nowhere to run. Ethan gritted his teeth, free hand tightening on his dagger, useless against this beast, but he'd wield it anyway. The truth had surfaced, raw and terrifying, and now it faced them, more monstrous than any nightmare he'd dared dream. Humanity's fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The creature's roar tore through the ash-strewn field, a primal, earth-shaking bellow that thundered from the depths of Klythera's broken crust. Ethan gripped Zirathul's hand tight, his breath bursting in frantic white clouds against the planet's frigid air. The beast's blood-red eyes locked onto them, blazing like twin infernos in the dark, and its 6 clawed legs slammed into the ground, kicking up clouds of ash with each shuddering step. No time to think, Ethan yanked her into a sprint, weaving through narrow paths between the ruins, his boots pounding the dry earth, the brittle crunch drowned by the monster's furious bellows behind them. But it was faster than he'd feared, faster than any drone or wasteland predator he'd ever faced. The shattered concrete walls flanking their path crumbled like paper under its blows, each crash a deafening boom, debris whistling through the air like unseen blades. Ethan's eyes darted across the terrain, searching for anything to slow it down. A jagged boulder lay amid the wreckage. He lunged, heaving it up with both hands, muscles straining as he hurled it at the beast. The rock sailed true, smashing into one of its legs with a sharp crack, dust exploding on impact, but it only faltered for a heartbeat before charging again, claws gouging deep furrows into the earth. He rifled through his bag, flinging a broken steel shard, then the last ration, packed the final scrap in his tattered canvas sack, but the beast didn't flinch, its roars growing closer, laced with a dry, guttural rasp promising death. Ethan clenched his jaw, his grip on Xyrothal's hand iron tight, feeling her faint pulse race beneath her icy skin. They couldn't outrun it. Her frail legs wobbled, her breath's ragged gasps echoing beside him like a silent plea. Then Xyrothal stopped short, yanking him back with a strength that belied her fragile frame. Ethan stumbled, spinning to face her, gray-brown eyes wide with confusion. She dragged him behind a crumbling wall, its cold concrete shielding them from the creature's sight. Before he could react, she snatched the small metal fragment from his hand, the one she'd clung to since their first refuge, and dropped to her knees, pressing it into the dusty ground. Her skeletal hands trembled, nails digging into her palms as she pushed down hard. A blinding green flash erupted, a sharp hiss crackling like unleashed lightning, and a shimmering force field snapped up around them, a thin, radiant barrier between life and annihilation. The beast charged, its scythe-like claws slashing down, striking the shield with a bone-rattling boom. The ground quaked, but the field held, repelling the creature with a shower of green sparks that rained onto the ash like dying stars. Ethan staggered back, shielding Xyrothal instinctively. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice rasped, a mix of awe and disbelief, eyes locked on the faintly glowing fragment beneath her hands. She didn't answer, kneeling, hands pressed to the metal, violet eyes shut tight as if pouring her last strength into it. Then a voice pierced his mind, not through his ears, but within, faint yet clear, like a whisper from a distant memory. "I am Xyrothal, pilot of Kron. I fled them, the destroyers of my world. This is their hunter. I thought I'd escape, but it found me." Ethan froze, his body rigid as if the blood in his veins had stopped. "You can talk? Why didn't you say something sooner?" His thoughts snapped back, raw with shock and a flicker of anger. Her voice returned, weaker, fading. "I couldn't. This device, it links minds. I didn't want to drag you in. But there's no choice now." The creature slammed the shield again, the impact shuddering through the air, faint cracks spidering across the glowing surface. Xyrothal looked up, violet eyes wide with desperation and resolve. "If I die, you must destroy it. It cannot live." Her words trembled in his skull, heavy with a vow he couldn't ignore. Ethan shook his head, gripping her shoulder. "No. We get out together." He snatched a long steel rod from the rubble, its jagged tip glinting in the shield's light. He rose, body taut, ready to charge when the barrier fell. The creature roared, claws raking the shield, cracks widening, the green glow flickering like a dying flame. But then a distant boom rolled through the night, the ground trembling anew. The beast paused, red eyes swiveling aside, and Ethan heard shouts, human voices, not monstrous growls. From the shadows emerged a band of survivors, over 30 figures under the faint moonlight, armed with crude weapons, iron clubs, makeshift guns, knives, and small gas canisters. They bellowed war cries, humanity's defiance clashing with the beast's fury, bullets bursting against its slick hide, leaving charred patches. Ethan seized Xyrothal's hand as the shield dissolved, pulling her toward the group, ash swirling in their wake. The creature lunged, a claw impaling the nearest man, blood spraying as his scream died in the air. But the survivors didn't break, they swarmed it, clubs smashing its legs, knives slicing its flesh, metal clanging in a chaotic symphony. A woman tossed a gas canister, the explosion erupting beneath the beast's belly, flames roaring, the stench of burning meat choking the air. Ethan leaped onto a broken wall, driving his rod into a gap between its legs, black blood gushing, scalding his hands, steaming on the ground. The creature howled, a claw flailing, hurling another fighter into a ruin, lifeless. Xyrothal's voice screamed in his mind. "Its head! The eyes!" Ethan gritted his teeth, charging, leaping onto its back, slipping on its slimy hide, hands clawing at a bleeding wound for grip. It thrashed, nearly throwing him, but he held fast, plunging the rod into its right red eye. A piercing shriek split the night, black blood fontaining, searing his shoulder. The beast staggered, claws slashing wildly, flinging Ethan to the ground, his back crashing against stone, breath knocked from his lungs. The survivors pressed their assault. A tall man rammed a club into its throat, bullets peppered its skull, smoke and dust choking the air. Xyrathal stumbled forward, snatching the fragment from the ground, pressing it hard. A green beam lanced out, piercing its remaining eye. The creature's final roar faded to a gurgle, its 6 legs quaking, claws scraping frantically before its massive bulk collapsed, the earth shaking like a small quake. Black blood pooled, steaming in the cold, its lifeless form still, red eyes extinguished. Ethan hauled himself up, panting, hand trembling around the blood-slick rod. "It's dead," he rasped, voice hoarse, locking eyes with Xyrathal, staring at the monstrous heap now just a corpse. But before relief could settle, the creature twitched one last time, a faint screech whining from its chest. Its dead eyes flared briefly, and a white signal shot skyward, piercing the dark like a beacon. Xyrathal paled, violet eyes widening in horror. "It called them. More will come." Ethan turned as a woman stepped from the group, tall, gaunt, short hair singed, brown eyes stunned as they fixed on Xyrathal. "Zyra?" she whispered, voice trembling with disbelief. Xyrathal's eyes blazed, a faint smile breaking through, and she released Ethan's hand, rushing to embrace her, frail arms clutching tight as if she'd vanish. Ethan stood still, breath slowing, piecing it together. This wasn't chance. The woman, a survivor from Kron, had joined these humans, and Xyrathal hadn't just found her kind. She'd led him to a community, a spark of hope for Klythera's people, a chance to rise from the ashes. He took her hand again, the other gripping the bloodied rod. He met her gaze, then the survivors rallying around them, his eyes hard as steel. "Then we'll be ready," he said, voice cutting through the stillness, not just to Xyrathal but to all. "Together." She nodded, her cold hand squeezing his, and in her violet eyes shone a new light, not just fear, but resolve. This final stand wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Humanity's fire burned brighter than ever. Beneath Klythera's crimson sky, the eternal sunset bathed the ash fields in a fierce glow, a flame unquenched amid the desolation. Ethan stood among the survivors, clutching the blood-stained rod, his gray-brown eyes alight with a steely determination he'd never known before. Beside him, Xyrathal stood tall, her frail form steady, violet eyes gleaming with hope and courage. Around them, the survivors, once shadows cowering in the dark, gathered, gripping crude weapons, their faces scarred by hunger and loss but now ignited with purpose. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying ash and the bite of scorched metal, but this time it wasn't a dirge for a dead world, it was a call to a new dawn. They were no longer two lost souls. Ethan looked at Xyrathal, then at the resolute faces surrounding him, and understood they'd become something greater, a symbol of unity across species, between humanity and the vast, mysterious cosmos. Xyrathal, holding the small fragment now still in her hand, hadn't just brought a tale of Kron's ruin, she'd brought a promise, a chance for Klythera's people to rise from the ashes, to fight not just for survival but for a future worth claiming. The woman from Kron, Xyrathal's old comrade, stepped forward, a hand on her shoulder, their eyes meeting in a silent moment, as if memories of their starship days rekindled a fire for all to see. Ethan drew a deep breath, chest swelling as the frigid air filled his lungs. He stepped onto a broken slab, his voice rising, rough but powerful, cutting through the wind. "They'll come. But we don't run anymore. This is Klythera, our home, and we'll defend it, together." A cheer answered, not loud, but fierce, a spark flaring against the storm. Xyrathal looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips, and in her violet eyes Ethan saw not just gratitude, but unshakable faith. They would not break. In Klythera's endless dark, a flame of hope blazed not just from the fires they'd kindle, but from the hearts of those standing here, human and alien alike, ready to face threats from the stars. The creature's signal had vanished into the sky, but Ethan knew whatever came, they'd fight. And with Xyrathal at his side, who'd led him from solitude to community, from despair to purpose, humanity wouldn't just endure. It would shine, a beacon among the infinite stars.